On another topic that you've been talking about, housing finance, you wrote about this recently in your recent Dish column. You wrote about the best worst case scenario for the housing finance giants, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Would you walk us through your argument?
Yeah, so remember what seems like 100 years ago, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were private companies that had government charters, and those government charters gave them some very special privileges. They had lines of credit at the Treasury. Their debt could be held in unlimited amounts by banks, for example, whereas a bank's not allowed to overinvest in one single thing in case the bank would get in trouble. That wasn't true. They could buy as much GSE debt as they wanted. A whole bunch of things, which allowed them to borrow cheaply, to hold very little capital, and then take their funds and go out and buy mortgages, put a guarantee on those mortgages, turn them into mortgage-backed securities, and sell them off to investors. And they also held some of them. So in the end, they were this very large entity that had two lines of business. One was a guarantee business, right? We guarantee this mortgage, and if not, we make the payments on behalf of the person who took the loan. And number two, it took these MBSs and stuck them in their own portfolio. So it was a big hedge fund. Borrow, invest in something. And it was a hedge fund invested in one thing, no diversification. And when it went south in a huge way during the housing collapse and the subprime mortgage crisis. So they end up as wards of the state. And the question is, what becomes their future? The Trump administration has worked aggressively after all these many years to turn them back into private companies, but not exactly the same as what they were before. So in particular, they need to hold more capital. And so for the first time, the FHFA, their regulator, issued a rule on how much capital do these giants have to hold to make them look more like big private banks and hold capital comparable to the big private banks. Problem, they're currently wards of the state, so they had to also change their agreement with Treasury to allow them to retain some of their earnings so they can accumulate capital. And indeed, what they're now allowed to do is retain all of their earnings to accumulate capital more rapidly. That's a good thing in my view. Not quite as good as having lots of competitors that do the same thing as them. There's still a duopoly, just two of them, but a better financed duopoly makes a lot more sense. And they need to have restrictions on their line of business, and the FHFA has got them out of different things that were very profitable but probably highly risky and likely to send it back to the taxpayer. So restrict that. They got the Financial Stability Oversight Council to designate the activity that they're in, making a mortgage-backed securities, as a systemically risky activity. So that formally puts their eyeball on Fannie and Freddie. Should they ever become private entities, they don't get to walk away from a lot of things, and they could be held to a higher level of capital on those grounds alone. So they've done a lot of things. They've done everything, in my view, except turn them loose with some better competition. So that's the best of the sort of bad outcomes. The worst outcome would have been just send them back the way they were, and now I was terrified about that. The next worst outcome would have been keep them as these weird wards of the state, which doesn't make a lot of sense and continually exposes the taxpayer. So we're in a sort of middle ground. It'll be interesting to see where the Biden administration takes it from here.